So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another Mechanical Backroads Arizona video. This is my new to me 2000 Jeep Wrangler TJ that has the 4.0 liter straight six along with a manual 5-speed transmission. One of the main reasons I purchased this Jeep was because it only had 98,000 miles on it, which I felt was pretty damn good for this old of a vehicle.
And because it had 98,000 miles on it, I figured the differentials and transfer case and transmission had never been changed. This video is strictly going to go over changing the transfer case fluid, and then there will be videos to come about the other fluids that I changed along with anything else that happens with this Jeep. Now, we are Amazon affiliates, but being as though I had pretty much everything that I needed for this oil change already, I didn't really buy anything. However, I will put similar items that might come in handy for you to do the same process that I did do some research on and found on Amazon. And those products will be in the description of my video if you want to check those out. So one of the first things that I had to do when I bought this Jeep was change out a bad transmission mount. And in order to do that transmission mount, I had to have the skid plate / cross member that holds that transmission mount down and out of the way. And while that skid plate was out of the way, that's when I went ahead and changed out the transfer case fluid, which allowed me to get great video footage because I did not have that skid plate obstructing the view of the camera in any way. However, I will explain the differences when you're going to be doing this oil change with the skid plate on the vehicle. While doing that tranny mount, the bolts that held the skid plate to the frame were stripped out, and I ended up having to put new nutserts in the frame, and that video will be on an icon at the end of this video if you want to check it out. However, this video is about changing out this transfer case fluid, so let's get to it. Now, the recommended oil change for this transfer case in this vehicle is every 30,000 miles according to the owner's manual. Now, you might think this sounds a little excessive, and I did too at first, but when you actually think about the fact that this vehicle does not have manual locking hubs on the front, so that front axle is always spinning and that front drive shaft is always spinning all the way back to the transfer case where it's disconnected from the rear drive shaft there. Now, all those extra parts moving all the time just creates a lot more friction and wears down that oil sooner, which is probably why they have you change this fluid every 30,000 miles. Now, the transfer case is bolted directly to the back of the transmission, and that goes for whether it's automatic or manual. However, the transfer case does have its own fluid and is completely isolated from that transmission, whether it is a manual or an automatic. Both the drain and the fill ports for this transfer case are on the back side of it. The drain port is in the lower left-hand corner, and then the fill / level check port is a little bit higher up and then more towards the center of the transfer case. And both of those plugs do use a 10mm Allen wrench in order to remove and install them. Now, being as though I didn't have the skid plate in my way, I was able to use a regular Allen wrench. However, you might want to get a 10mm Allen socket so you can put an extension on it in order to reach past that skid plate to make it a little easier. Now, if either the fill or the drain plugs seem like they have a bunch of debris in them because these vehicles do tend to go off-road, make sure you use a pick or a small screwdriver to dig that stuff out before trying to remove them, so there's no possibility of you stripping out these plugs. It might also be necessary to take a small hammer or something else and tap the Allen wrench or Allen socket into that drain plug and fill plug in order to make sure you are in there all the way, once again to possibly prevent it from stripping out. So right here I'm just using my 10mm Allen wrench in order to loosen up the drain plug on the transfer case. So I actually made a mistake with this. What I should have done is remove the fill plug before removing the drain plug. And as this is draining, you'll see why I say that. It's going to have a very non-consistent flow to it, which especially with the skid plate on, would make it a pain in the ass to try and deal with. The reason this happens is because there's more fluid being dumped out the drain than air can be drawn in through the breather of the transfer case, and because of that, it gives you inconsistent flow. If the fill plug was removed, it would be able to draw the same amount of air into the transfer case as the fluid is coming out, giving you a much more consistent flow out that drain and making it much easier to try and direct it through the holes in the skid plate and into the drain pan. Because my guess is with this skid plate on, it's going to make a really big mess. So right here's a picture with the skid plate on the vehicle. You can see the drain plug right there. And that drain plug is basically right above this recessed area in the skid plate that has 4 different holes. And that mess is probably going to divide evenly among all those 4 holes. So you need to have a pretty big drain pan underneath you. One thing I did think about is if you have a somewhat large piece of PVC, you could pull that drain plug and stick that PVC over that plug, push it up tight, and you might be able to direct most of that fluid directly into a drain pan behind the skid plate.
This is all hypothetical. I've never tried it, and I didn't have to in this situation because I had the skid plate off. And here is a quick clip of me not removing that fill plug like I should have, because I like to show you guys the mistakes I made, so hopefully you don't make those same mistakes.
No chunks. So far, so good. Okay. Don't get crazy. God damn it. No splattering. Stop it.
You'll notice as this is draining, once the level drops, where the drain plug actually has a consistent place to draw air in, that the oil stops gurgling and goes to a consistent flow. Whenever draining fluids on your vehicle, I do recommend using a clean drain pan so you can investigate that oil or that pan for any big chunks of material or anything like that after you're done draining it. You can also look at it as it's draining out and make sure you don't have any of those same things. Now the fluid that is in this transfer case is an ATF +3 or +4, which should be a nice bright red color. However, since this oil's never been changed, it does have that grayish tinge to it, and that's not that big of a deal. That is just a little bit of gear wear that's mixed in with that fluid. We're gonna get rid of that with the new fluid. And the fact that I didn't see any big chunks coming out while it was draining, I was very happy with the end result.
And please be responsible, guys, with your oil disposal. Don't just throw it in the dumpster or something like that. That's an asshole move. Please dispose of it properly by going to your local auto parts store, and they should take it without a problem. That's why I really like the drain pan that I'm using on the bottom, because it has a screw-on lid, so it's very easy to take it down and get it disposed of properly. Once it was done draining, I went ahead and reinstalled the drain plug. I did put pipe tape on it just to give it a little extra sealing. When tightening down drain plugs that are a pipe thread, it's a good idea to take a picture or count the threads before removing that drain plug. That way you can put it back and make sure you're close to the same amount of threads sticking out of the transfer case as you did before you took it off. If you do want to torque it to spec, from what I found, it's 14 to 20 foot-pounds of torque. You'll notice that I put that drain plug in with the Allen wrench with the less torque on that handle, basically the shorter end. And then once I couldn't go any farther that way, I flipped it around and just used the long end or the one with more leverage and went another half to maybe 3/4 of a turn and called it good. When dealing with plugs that are pipe thread like these are, pipe plugs are tapered, so the more you tighten them in, the wider they get. So if you get crazy with over tightening this drain plug, you could possibly crack the transfer case housing, especially because the drain plug is a pipe thread and it's made of steel, which is a harder material than the cast aluminum that the transfer case is made of. Now this is very unlikely because in order to do something like that, you would have to be putting a massive amount of force on that drain plug, but you do want to keep it in mind and be careful. Now I've never actually seen somebody do it on a transfer case plug. However, I did see somebody tighten down a reverse pressure switch on an automatic transmission and cracked the bung that sensor threaded into because they over tightened it and it was a pipe plug. Now once again, this is highly unlikely because that transfer case is pretty tough. But you do want to keep in mind that you're just putting a drain plug back in. You're not tightening down a bolt that's holding that transfer case to the transmission. Once tightening down that drain plug, I did use some brake clean just to clean off any residual oil that was still on the transfer case from when it was draining. Now in the owner's manual, it specified that the transfer case takes a Dextron 2 or ATF +3. I ended up getting an ATF +4 from Valvoline, and it is back compatible with ATF +3. And I did use my fluid pump in order to pump that because I used a gallon jug that I had instead of having to buy individual quarts. I used that 10mm Allen to remove the fill plug, which I should have done before removing the drain plug, as I had mentioned earlier. Stuck that fluid pump inside that gallon jug and stuck it in the fill hole. Now because that lid for that pump is made for a quart bottle, I just had to sit it on top of there, which made it quite the pain in the ass in order to pump it. And I did drop the stupid suction hose down in the gallon jug a couple times, which absolutely pissed me off, but I was able to get this thing full. Now, as far as the oil capacity of this transfer case, I heard anything from 2.2 quarts to just under 2 quarts. I actually used just under half of this 1 gallon container that was brand new. So if you buy 2 quarts, you should be good to go as far as filling this to the proper level. Now, in the actual owner's manual, it says to fill this level to a 1/2 inch below the bottom of the fill hole. However, with the transfer case, you got a lot of room in there. I went ahead and filled it to the point where it was barely dribbling out the fill plug. And just like the drain plug, I did put some pipe tape on that fill plug. Went as much as I could using the short leverage side of the Allen head, and then went about a 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn past that and called it good. Now there is a right and wrong way in order to put pipe thread tape on a plug, and if you're not sure which way that is, I will put an icon at the end of this video that you can click on that will help you out. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible, so I don't waste your time. There will be more videos to come on this Jeep as far as accessory, modifications, and anything else mechanical that happens to it. So make sure you turn on the notifications button and tune in, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.